We're living in a time when politician accountability isn't just lacking. In many cases, it's mocked or laughed at altogether. We're a week removed from the Senate Majority Leader on the Senate floor calling for the censorship of the country's most popular cable news host.
Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, tell Carlson not to run a second segment of lies.
Openly betraying one of the country's first principles while espousing his own supposed commitment to its founding.
And it's an insult to everyone who cares about our democracy and wishes to preserve the dream of our founders.
And if you think it might be better for you to see that January 6th footage for yourself, or if you think he might not be entirely truthful with his propaganda, or if you have even thoughts about what sort of accountability might be appropriate for such oath-breaking, well, you're the terrorist, or at least you're the one creating the terroristic circumstances.
Conduct like theirs is just asking for another January 6th.
Now, of course, any further discussion of how Jefferson and company likely would have actually viewed this situation is itself terroristic too, so any consideration of Big Bird costumes will have to be substituted with other methods of accountability. We'll have to settle for the check on power that Schumer is ironically condemning. The free press, obviously much of the time that's no check on power at all these days either, only amplification of the politician's own propaganda, but every once in a while, they do at least a glimmer of their job. Before I get any further in this delusion, let me stop myself right there because I realize I'm about to frame Chris Wallace at CNN as some sort of savior of the Republic, or at least some shade of it. That's how thirsty for accountability I actually am. I'll start salivating at just the slightest drop of it. So no, I won't overstate, but I will acknowledge, even if not sufficiently satisfying, it is still a degree of satisfying to watch these people squirm when challenged with even the slightest touch of the truth. And that's really all this is, gentle challenge in the fuller context of the usual self-aggrandizement and self-victimization, but the challenge is still worth it. Chris Wallace actually brought some data to confront fellow tyrant Gretchen Whitmer on her nonsensical lockdown rule over Michigan, and it completely exposes how these people have not only no hesitation to ruin your life, but no decency to think critically or reflect about it later. Just a smirk and a laugh and an, oh golly gee, I was just trying my best. Aw shucks authoritarianism is the perfect way to characterize it. Maybe Urkel authoritarianism would be another. Did I do that? Is the apparent reasoning here. And implicitly, some stock Family Matters laugh track is supposed to be our reaction instead of the appropriate Jeffersonian activation. Of course, the interview gets its pleasantries out of the way first. Oh, wow, Gretchen. Trump sure was mean to you. Wasn't Trump very, very mean?
Then President Trump tweeted, "Liberate Michigan," and he also targeted you.
Oh man, it was awful.
Also, remember that kidnapping plot against you that totally wasn't an FBI op? Wasn't that so scary and authentic?
Law enforcement broke up a plan to kidnap you and put you on trial, and you have said since then, this wasn't a kidnapping plot, this was an assassination plot.
They were going to execute me, kind of like you see, happen in terrorist, situations.
No mention of the multiple federal agents at the center of the plot. No mention of the acquittals at trial. No mention that it took a constitutionally suspect second trial to get the guys that she's talking about. And no mention that these guys were not in fact prosecuted for or convicted of attempted murder in any way. Nobody was in this entire plot, not federal or state. But all of that is just the small talk for Big Gretch. And yes, Chris Wallace did call her Big Gretch.
Even for someone known as Big Gretch, this must have shaken you.
Yeah, it was hard. My whole family's made sacrifices.
Yeah, great. I'm sure it must have been tough. But speaking of family sacrifices, let's get to all of the sacrifices that you imposed on other people's families. That's where this interview finally gets worthwhile. Say, Chris asks, isn't it weird how your stricter lockdown methods not only weren't effective, but actually corresponded with significantly worse death rates than other states who took the more lenient approach of respecting citizens' rights to make decisions for themselves?
But I do want to explore a little bit with you the effectiveness of your lockdowns. Michigan was one of the last states to lift a cap on public gatherings in June of 2021. By comparison, Florida lifted its cap in September of 2020. But the death rate for Florida from June of 20 to June of 21 was 39.6 per 100,000. The death rate for Michigan was 97.3 per 100,000, so more than double. Why did Florida do so much better without the cap than Michigan did with the cap?
I've seen a lot of reports about some of the numbers that you've just cited from Florida, and perhaps the lack of confidence in the accuracy of them. I listened to the best experts in the world, the people here at the University of Michigan. I made hard decisions because lives were on the line. And the biggest fear in the back of my mind was that this pandemic would look like the 1918 pandemic, which took a lot of young children's lives. That's why I think studies here have shown that we've saved thousands of lives. And at the end of the day, the most important thing that government does is keep people safe.
That is legitimately one of the most astounding 1-minute segments of wrongness I have ever heard. Note just the opening contradiction. I just trusted the experts, Chris. That's why I did everything that I did. But also, you can't trust the experts who provided the data. Those people are completely shady. The source of Chris's data is the CDC. In every other context, this is a woman saying, listen to the CDC uncritically. That's the justification she's relying on for all of her policy choices, except for when the policy produces bad outcomes. Then it's who the hell knows. Who can really trust the CDC at all anyway? I wouldn't. Except for when I did and forced you to. After a contradiction, she just moves into a lie. Studies show that we saved thousands of lives. No, they don't. Which studies? Chris's CDC data show you lost thousands more lives than other states. Worldometer data show the same thing. Michigan is the 8th worst state per capita for COVID deaths. Not just worse than Florida, but worse than the similarly lockdown avoidant South Dakota, worse than the most Trump-voting state, Wyoming, worse than any neighboring Midwestern state, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, worse than all of those. You can go internationally. Sweden didn't do this nonsense. Sweden's per capita death rate is half of Michigan's. And don't just take a study. Take a study of studies. Johns Hopkins researchers conducted a meta-analysis to find out if these lockdown measures produced any positive health outcomes across the world. They didn't. 24 studies analyzed the consistent theme, little to no public health effect for lockdown measures. By contrast, significant economic damage. So when she says studies show, even the plural part of that statement is an additional lie. She can't show one study to the effect that she's claiming, and even if she could, it doesn't counter the mountain of evidence otherwise. From contradiction to lie to just plain emotional desperation. Oh, I was just thinking of the children, that's all. I had to make sure this wasn't going to be another 1918 culling of the kids. Chris Wallace asked about lockdown measures that extended into summer 2021. Even if we grant the premise that it's best to be cautious with the unknown, there was no unknown over a year in. Nowhere in Michigan, nowhere in the country, nowhere in the world were children at risk from COVID. In fact, the risk of the flu was far greater for kids. Ron DeSantis knew this in fall 2020, and even the PolitiFact hacks couldn't dispute it. But Gretchen Whitmer still kept kids in the rest of the state locked down for months on end longer despite the data. Not because of it. So that makes contradiction, lie, desperate emotional appeal, and to finish this package of dishonesty, we now conclude with philosophical inaccuracy. After all, the most important thing government does is keep people safe, she says. First of all, even if that was the philosophical basis for government, you failed. Michiganders were more damaged than citizens of other states, but more importantly, no. You don't swear an oath to keep the people safe. You swear an oath to protect and defend their rights under the Constitution, and those rights are more important than your subjective judgment of their safety. Protecting those rights is the entire and only reason government exists in the first place. Again, I'll refer to the country's foundational writing of the original insurrectionist, terrorist, kidnap plotter Thomas Jefferson. But this is where it gets really good. You would think that with any degree of reflection on this unbelievable sequence of contradiction, lying, desperate emotional appeal, and philosophical confusion, Gretchen Whitmer, that someone of Big Gretchen's admirable and impressive character that such a good person would be perfectly capable of acknowledging when a significant mistake or two was made. Of course, the aw shucks authoritarian tries to couch it in more self-aggrandizement still. Sure, I'd do some things differently, because after all, humility is one of the many amazing traits for which I should be admired.
Looking back and looking at some of these numbers, do you think you overreacted?
If I could go back in a time machine with all the knowledge we've accumulated, would I do some things differently? Absolutely. And any governor who doesn't say that exact same answer doesn't know enough to know what they do and didn't know during the time.
I knew that I didn't know everything, which is why I told you that I did know everything, imposed my superior knowledge on you, and chastised you for asking any questions otherwise. But speaking of those questions, Chris Wallace does a glimmer of the right thing. Again, he asks the obvious follow-up, well, what specifically would you do differently? And we get yet another amazing craft cocktail of contradiction and lies.
If there was one thing in particular that you could do differently, what would it be?
Michigan would have been manufacturing the world's masks and swabs and would have helped keep people safe.
But I mean in terms of lockdown.
There were moments where we, had to make some decisions that, in retrospect, don't make a lot of sense, right? If you went into the hardware store, you could go in the hardware store, but we didn't want people, all congregating around the gardening supplies. People said, oh, she's outlawed seeds. It was February in Michigan. No one was planting anyway. But that being said, some of those policies, I look back and think, that what maybe was a little more than we needed to do.
I would have manufactured masks in the places of employment that I otherwise shut down at the highest rate of any other state, losing jobs at nearly the highest rate in the country. Though I guess, in fairness, putting those businesses and people to work making masks would have been better than no work at all, even if that market has now crashed. But this talk about the seeds issue is where the real substance is. If you don't recall, one of Whitmer's famous overreaches was a ban on garden center access in larger stores. And let's acknowledge the lie right away. This wasn't February, as she says. The order was issued in April, originally to extend through the end of the month. Beyond the lie, there's the logical contradiction. We had to stop everyone from congregating around a thing that nobody was actually interested in anyway because it was February. If the original justification was that everyone was crowding around and we had to stop it, how is the defense now that it doesn't matter because nobody was crowding around anyway? True to formula. Next is the philosophical confusion. Oh, it's fine because nobody was interested in buying seeds anyway. Well, whether people have interest in seeds or not does not excuse the action. It's like saying the censorship is fine because nobody says that word anyway. No, censorship is wrong in principle, and so is arbitrarily restricting the property and assembly rights of the people with the mere stroke of a pen. If someone takes a crap in your driveway, but you're on vacation so you don't notice, it's still wrong, though perhaps there is an argument for the Pelosi exception to that rule. Most importantly, though, note the absolute delusion and cruelty of it all. The thing I regret the most is the thing that was completely inconsequential and didn't matter at all. Really, she does not regret shutting down schools at the worst rate in the region to students' academic suffering, the worst test scores in 30 years. She does not regret chasing a nice old man through months of court battle for no reason other than she was too vindictive to simply let him cut hair as he has for decades. Though I guess he should be thankful at least she let that guy live, because she apparently does not regret shoving COVID-positive elderly people back into nursing homes by the thousands, surely contributing, if not primarily explaining, her near worst in the nation COVID death rate. To be clear, the thing that she most regrets is just something that made her look personally silly, not the things of greatest consequence on the lives of her citizens. She doesn't regret introducing the virus into the nursing home and then blocking you from your grandma's deathbed. She doesn't regret stunting your kids' academic and social growth. She doesn't even regret achieving neither safety nor freedom. She said she was trading one for the other and then achieved none. Instead, more people died and more businesses and jobs died with them. She has no demonstration of effectiveness, but worse still, she has no remorse or critical self-reflection for the damage of the many election shockers of 2022. her re-election despite this performance may be the greatest of them all, of course qualified with whatever fortification assistance you may suspect. But assuming the results are true and accurate, yes, the sheer vibrance of this stunning and brave grin was indeed enough to convince Michigan voters to overlook all of it. If you want the real clown pill, have a browse through the YouTube comments on this interview for at least anecdotal evidence of the delusion, absolute fawning sycophancy, and more twisted logic pretzels than even Gretchen's own. What an inspiration! What a beautiful hero! What a clear thinker! If only there were more Gretchen Whitmers, please run for president. She was obviously successful because, after all, you can't compare Michigan and Florida anyway. Florida is coastal, and everyone knows that Atlantic and Gulf breeze exterminates COVID on contact, unlike Great Lakes breeze, which has no such properties. After all, it's colder in Michigan, and people have to stay inside, leading to vitamin D deficiency, which doesn't explain why Michigan experienced more COVID deaths than any other Great Lakes state and any other Canadian border state. This one's my favorite, though. Florida is older, so that's why Florida had fewer COVID deaths per capita. Yes, the people with compromised immune systems in Florida actually died less because they got the shots and they stayed home, unlike those idiot rubes in Michigan who watched the wrong news channel. Even though the anti-vax Michigan rubes voted for Whitmer, and the responsible and cautious Florida elderly voted for DeSantis. And I know these are just rando YouTube comments. They're not representative of anything beyond a select group of actual CNN viewers, a rightfully shrinking demographic. But it is still demonstration, though, that the number of people who still think this way, despite all available evidence otherwise, and despite no coherent explanation from their political idol, that number is not zero, or anything as close to zero as it should be. These are people who would uncritically walk around with their thumbs up their asses in public if Whitmer or anybody else ordained by Fauci told them to. I'm convinced they would hang themselves to slow the spread if the right person told them it's for the greater good. So if there's anybody in whom I'm more disappointed than the unapologetic tyrants themselves, it's us, for not just accepting it, but in many cases actually cheering it and failing to learn the lessons well after they are clear in retrospect. Because it's one thing to make mistakes in moments of uncertainty. We all do that inevitably. But to refuse to learn from those mistakes, that is how you suffer the real consequences. Oh, but as long as the suffering comes with a stunning and caring smile, that is apparently the preference. After all, we want nothing to do with the alternative of ruthless prosperity. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.